David Lammy has U-turned on ruling China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims as a genocide. Labour has backtracked on plans to push for formal recognition of China's treatment of the Uyghurs as genocide. In opposition, Labour backed a Commons motion that declared China's conduct all genocide and urged the government to seek formal recognition of this through the UN with other countries. Stephen Kinnock, then Shadow Asia Minister, said in 2021 that it was not enough to leave the matter to international courts because China would have to consent to an investigation. Now, what I find so unbelievably ironic about Kinnock's comment there, back in 2021, is that they never took this approach with Israel. Just as we have been saying for at least a year, Israel has been committing a genocide, we didn't need the ICC to declare it. Yet Labour did take this approach, but only with China. With Israel, we have to defer to the courts. And even when the courts say, yeah, this is probably a genocide, Labour refused to acknowledge it and still use the line, Israel has a right to defend themselves. But they've now backtracked on China, which, it doesn't make sense. We understand that when it comes to Israel, politicians fall in line with the current established foreign policy of supporting Israel, no matter what, with pressure from the US and of course, Israel. But China are seen as adversaries to the West, which, means that many Western nations didn't hesitate to call out the Uyghur genocide. So what on earth is the reason behind the change from David Lammy? Is the lives of people less important than trade? Rota, I really want to get your thoughts on this. Please, can you shine some light on this backtracking?
I think honestly, it's a similar situation for a quite a strange reason at first thought. So the UK, when it has to deal with the United States vis-a-vis Israel or China vis-a-vis the Uyghur population, we have to think of the fact that it is not dealing with it as a peer or an equal. This is a superpower and an emerging superpower. And prior to Brexit, it was able to work through the EU to operate on that kind of eye level when it wanted to deal with things. And now, unfortunately, it has to go with hat in hand. And we've seen that the Keir Starmer government is really, really keen on investment. So foreign direct investment, especially for, very, very rich China. I believe they were talking about some sort of 11 billion pound investment. It was the number I saw quoted earlier today. This is big money, and that's what Kier is really all about. And that is the primacy thing. And when you say, does trade trump over people? Yes, unfortunately, a lot of the time, yes, that is indeed unfortunately what is happening. And the Keir Starmer government is being very normal, unfortunately, in that respect.
It kind of answered my next question, which was, I'll go into my question. Is basically, do you think that with the shift in global hegemonic powers, that the threats of China with the West field, yes, okay, right, they put trade above people, but do you think it's because they kind of want to get involved in this new sort of geopolitical powers? Are they desperate to make closer connections with them economically? You say yes, but here's the thing: there are two ways we can approach China. Some say cooperation, some say a trade war. Now, of course, for me, and I'm sure yourself, a genocide is a genocide. It needs to be called out regardless of the nation, regardless of who our allies are, which obviously includes Israel and those who we potentially want to cooperate with. Um, I was going to say, what do you think is behind this? Do you think David Lammy and Keir Starmer are thinking beyond just, oh, this is economically beneficial? Given that, I would say the powers that be, given that the Labour Party, as recently as 3 years ago, did say that this is a genocide, that they're maybe in the last couple of years, couple of months, they're taking a softer approach on China because we realize that maybe in 10 years, 15 years' time, the US may no longer be the superpower and, in fact, will be China.
I think when you were saying that, I was thinking in my head around this idea that David Lammy throws around of like progressive realism. And if
Mm.
we should just take them at their words, they're realists. So let's look at the situation in this idea. So there is a pretty high chance there will be some sort of conflict between the US and China, as we've seen with a lot of the movement around Taiwan lately, which is not great. Um, the calculation by David Lammy and Keir Starmer is probably, how can we get a good economic deal out of China as much as possible in a very short amount of time in case something goes really, really poorly, but we'll still have the money. So at the end of the day, we'll come up. And that's really like the most realist way you can look at that situation is if there's like 50-50 chance, let's try and get as many billions of pounds in before everything turns around. And I think the reality at the end of the day is Britain, just like a, a lot of Europe, is highly dependent on the U.S. as because it can't defend itself. That's just like a realistic thing right now. We're in a very dangerous geopolitical situation where we have two theaters of the world already kicking off in pretty expansive wars at this point. I mean, it's not just a genocide in Gaza. We're talking like an expansive regional war that's breaking out very slowly. And then Ukraine and Russia has been going into now the third year in a couple of months. Um, this is the real thing I think they're probably thinking about. And this allows they can put to the side human rights. They can put to the side whatever because they're thinking what's the best situation we can get in this situation. And I'm not agreeing with them. I'm just laying out the
Mm.
logic that I think
Oh, yeah,
I would
sure.
agree. I can see them going with.
I mean, it almost reeks of desperation here, though, because it to me it feels like an admission that the current powers are falling. Of course, for us, that's been a long time happening. We went from the so-called heights of the British Empire. When I say heights, I don't mean morally high, but I mean
Yeah.
economically. Of course, we were the powerhouse of the world, and over time we have fallen from the so-called world stage. Some people also say that Brexit was the sort of death knell of the empire. But really, I mean, that's part of it, but mostly it's been the US over the last 50, 60 years, maybe longer actually, rising to prominence. But this move really does feel quite desperate because, and also to me, I mean, actually, I want to ask you this. Do you feel like that Britain no longer feels secure in the power of the US? Because let's be honest, we get our foreign policy from Washington. It's exactly when it comes to Israel. I mean, the reason why we're still defending Israel is because the US told us you're gonna have to stick with Israel, and we do whatever they say. But it's strange that we're taking this approach when it comes to China, and it feels like to me that there's an acknowledgement that maybe we can't always rely on the US. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? It's an interesting dynamic.
I think I don't know. So like I would say like very sensible people in the Labour Party would say like uh the smart move geopolitically is the UK always has to go along with the US because that's just the deal. We're stuck in this defensive situation. And also we don't want to pay a ton of extra money for our military. And that's what a lot of countries are in, regardless of how you feel about the US or US imperialism. That's the deal a lot of countries have cut with the US. They provide the military, the country doesn't provide the military. And you saw in Brussels yesterday, I want to say 2 days ago, we had the big announcement of the 500 billion defense package. And while that sounds like a lot of money, that is not a lot of. This is over 10 years, so that actually is like 50 billion. That's not that much money when we're talking about building a continental-wide military force. And so even like at this extreme escalation in like the EU moving towards a defensive structure, it's still not paying the level of money it would need to replace the capabilities and capacities the US currently provides. And everyone, I would say, who has a couple of brain cells to rub together is of the appearance in 2016 that, oh man, like NATO's super unstable right now. And like, what would a rapid US pullout? They're also very aware that the Trump campaign has worked out three ways to it's like do a soft NATO withdrawal. So if you're not aware, there was a law passed in the US, I want to say like 2 years ago by the Congress that made it so that the president couldn't unilaterally withdraw from NATO. This was like basically an anti-Trump preventative measure. So he has, through the Heritage Foundation and a couple of other kind of Republican think tanks, thought up ideas of basically that you could like limit the actual engagement to either just the nuclear warheads or maybe just like the air and the nuclear shield. And even then, this would be a ridiculous withdrawal down. And that's just the reality. It's we're talking like a huge shift in American power across the world. And this is whether like Trump or not, because we can talk about like is the US in general kind of destabilizing, is able to like right itself to maintain its position, even like if everything kind of worked out for it. That's one thing. The other thing is like you have one of the political parties that has just decided that they're really keen on hyper isolationism, and that's very dangerous too because Yeah, I mean, the whole the whole defense structure of Europe can't change within a few months. It will literally take years to be able to replace some of these systems. But we're very realistically looking forward into a situation that has to change. And that's also in a situation where like there is no war in Taiwan. The things in Ukraine do not escalate. Stuff in Israel either stays at pace or lowers down, and and things are still pretty bad then. Um, yeah, so like every country's in a bad situation. Britain's in a particularly bad one because it's out on its own, and because there's this weird trauma within like the political elite to not address Brexit when everyone knows like it's the issue at the moment, and especially on this like national security side of things. Um, this is a big problem. This is a major existential problem that a lot of countries have to answer. They're trying one way in Brussels. The UK is trying to figure out if it can keep with the US as long as possible, and also, I guess, triangulate a new position. Maybe figure. I don't know. It's you have to if you don't believe your patron is with you, right? Like you're gonna have to start working to find some other patrons. And for some reason, they don't want to go back to Brussels. They gotta hunt around, unfortunately.
I mean, it's really interesting about Donald Trump. I mean, he is, in a lot of ways, the establishment guy. He's a billionaire. He supports corporations, supports tax cuts for the very wealthy. But in another sort of wrinkle, he's also very anti-establishment when it comes to some foreign policy. I mean, he's very much US aligned when it comes to Israel. He is more pro-Israel than Kamala Harris, even though Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, that administration, is very, very pro-Israel. But yes, he has mentioned things such as NATO maybe pulling out. He's also talked about um, uh, talking up Putin, Xi Jinping. So it's very interesting there, and that's in terms of the establishment of very scared of Trump. It's also very interesting again about how we are kind of on our own if we lose the US. Who is going to be our big brother, a big partner that's going to save us all? It's all up in the air, and it's going to be very interesting to see in the next decade where the powers shift to.
I think we also have to remember like Trump's tariff policy. Like he wants to slap 20%
Yes,
tariffs on
absolutely.
everything. So I mean, like I was very frustrated, and I made TikToks about this, about like labor's,
Mm.
going to to placate the Trump campaign and stuff. But I think they're really trying to get a waiver out of that. I mean, that would be very bad for the UK and every other country. I mean, Trump too really wants to do some dangerous things for the global economy, for the US, like a lot of stuff, but like for stuff that'll hit us in a very direct way, it's not good. And honestly, it could lead to a financial crisis like very quickly.
Would you say potentially a bigger crisis than 2008?
That's complicated.
Mm.
I think it would be like because it's like about slowing down the supply lines. It would be like if that boat was stuck in the dam or the Suez Canal forever. Like that's the effect. You know how like everything just basically ground to a halt and then like the prices started just like doo, doo, doo. Yeah, I feel like it was to be that, but for years until Trump decided not to do it anymore.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.